Hey guys, it's Destiny, and today I wanted to rank every character in Honkai Star Rail as it has been requested for a while now, just to give my thoughts on each of these characters. And before we carry on, let me know your favorite character in Honkai Star Rail and why. For me personally, I'd have to say one of my favorites is definitely Black Swan. Lastly, if you guys enjoy videos like these, do make sure to subscribe, leave a like to support the video, and now let's get straight into it. So as you guys can see, here's a tier list for today's video, which I decided to categorize every single tier, if you will, since I think that will give a better idea of what I actually think of the characters rather than doing like an S, A, B, C type of thing. Cause like, I just personally feel like categorizing can be a little bit better just for giving, once again, a better idea of what I actually think of the characters, and I can explain why. So we're going to have incredible value at the top, which is the highest pull value. Then you have very strong and useful characters, great characters, decent characters, and characters I don't recommend as much as the other characters above. And then we also have underrated characters, which are characters I think personally that don't get enough shine, typically speaking, when it comes to just showing them off or even other tier lists in general. And then we have the unreleased characters, which I can't really talk about these since they haven't released yet, so I can't really give my full opinion on them just yet. So if we were to start off with Tingyun, I personally think Tingyun is either in the very strong or useful characters or even incredible pull value for your account. She can honestly be either or, but for right now, let me just place her in the very strong / useful characters. The reason why Tingyun is here in particular is because she is an incredible support with what she's able to provide team members. She's able to give really nice attack buffs to an ally, but the more important thing that she's able to do, which is definitely one of her best benefits, is definitely that energy that she can provide for another ally on the team. This can help out with certain rotations you might want to be able to pull off. And this can also just help your DPS character use their ultimate more frequently. The main two characters though I really wouldn't typically pair her with though would be Acheron, since Acheron doesn't use energy. Instead, she uses her stacks. And then of course there is Blade. And Blade primarily just benefits from other buffers a bit more than Tingyun. So those are the main two characters I don't typically play her with. But other than that, I feel like Tingyun is a great support, definitely one of the best 4-star characters you can invest into. Now we have Asta, which personally I feel like Asta could honestly go in the underrated characters here, just because of the fact that I do think she does get a bit slept on in comparison to some of the other buffers. And the only reason I say this is because of the fact that she's able to be used on a good amount of teams with what she's able to provide. She can provide a good amount of attack and really nice speed buffs for the team, which if you pair this with Dance Dance Dance, Asta is going to allow your team members definitely to act more often within turn cycles. She's also a really nice alternative. If you do not have Ruan Mei, you can use Asta on your damage over time teams. Asta is able to provide them speed as well as attack, which damage over time characters heavily benefit from. For example, Kafka definitely loves these buffs since they're going to be able to act more, which if you're able to act more, that means you're going to be able to stack more frequent damage over time onto enemies, which just results in more damage overall. So I do personally feel like Asta is a bit underrated. She's also a free-to-play character and she's a great character overall. Now we have Serval, which Serval I would either put in underrated as well, or she's a great character. Now, I do personally think that a lot of people overlook Serval, and one of the biggest perks with Serval in particular is that she has a really low ultimate cost of only 100. And she's also able to get back energy faster if enemies are shocked, which means that you're going to be able to unleash your ultimate very frequently when you are using Serval. I have done a showcase on her before. And personally, I do feel like if you're looking at a free-to-play lightning character, let's say you don't really have the 5-star lightning characters, then I do think Serval is actually a really great option to consider just if you are free to play or maybe you don't have too many character options. I personally use her still just because, one, she's a pretty fun character, but she's also able to dish out a good amount of damage if you actually have pretty nice supports with her. She can be paired up with, for example, Sparkle. Sparkle's able to give her a bunch of crit damage, and you can easily run attack boots on Serval as a result. You can pair Serval up, of course, with Tingyun if you want to use your ultimate even more often. Tingyun is just a great option, as I've mentioned before, just for giving your main DPS their ultimate even more. I personally feel like Serval can be in the underrated category because I do think a lot of people do overlook her because of the fact that there are, our 5-star DPS lightning characters. So I would just place her in underrated for right now. Now we have Bronya, which Bronya I would either say is in the very strong / useful category as well, or the incredible value for your account for the highest pull value. I'm just gonna put her right here for right now, but honestly, when it comes to Bronya in particular, I do feel like for a standard 1.0 character, she has definitely held up pretty nicely. And I know there has been a bunch of comparisons between her and like Ruan Mei and Sparkle, and of course, just other buffing characters in general, which I understand why. I do feel like though Bronya has definitely been able to still be a very viable option all this time. She pairs really nicely with Boothill, for example, which Boothill just released. So that shows that she still has a good amount of potential for sure. She's able to advance your ally forward by 100%, and if you decide to either make her super fast, so that Bronya acts very often, or if you decide to make her 1 to 2 speed lower than your main DPS, Bronya just allows your main DPS to get a good amount of buffs that definitely help with damage output, as well as being able to advance them forward by 100%, which means you're going to be able to attack more often as a result. So I feel like Bronya she's still an incredible character. I love this character, and I feel like she's still a very viable option to use to this day. If you haven't picked her up from the 300 selector and you don't have Bronya, honestly, out of the characters from the 300 selector, I would typically recommend Bronya the most because of how good she is on just like a bunch of team comps. Now we have Seele, which Seele is in a weird spot for me personally. For right now, let me just place her. I'm just going to place her here. If she gets moved later on, we'll see. But Seele's main flaw is if enemies are a little too beefy and you aren't able to actually get off your resurgence, then it does become a little more tricky when it comes to actually being able to take full advantage of her skill kit. You want to be able to proc resurgence, as frequently as possible, then Seele will then be able to attack more often and deal just, a bunch of damage from her own self buffs, as well as whatever buffs you may have from the allies on your team. So honestly, it's really hard for me to rank her because I have noticed that a lot of the enemies as of recently, they've been getting beefier and beefier with their HP thresholds. Even the mobs have been starting to get more HP from what I've seen. If you're not able to even KO the mob, then you're definitely going to be struggling with actually getting resurgence as frequently as possible. So that can definitely be, I guess, a flaw for Seele in particular. I do think though, out of our DPS characters, she's still an amazing DPS. I personally still use her. And I do personally think that she has done really well since when she came out up to now. She's still able to clear Memory of Chaos with ease. So that's something to definitely keep in mind, is that she's still really good at clearing a bunch of content in the game. As for Gepard, I would personally put him in the great characters category. I do think Gepard is a really nice sustain. I do think Gepard though, if you have him, he's still a really good character to invest into because he is able to freeze enemies. If you run him with Acheron, you can have him hold the Trend Market Light Cone, which is a great light cone to put on your preservation class characters. But overall, when it comes to some of our other sustains, he can be a little lackluster in comparison just because of how much they are pumping into the sustains in general, since a lot of them now are able to provide additional buffs. For example, Fushuan is able to provide crit rate, Huahua is able to provide the attack and energy, and then you also have Aventurine who's able to inflict the unnerved onto enemies. He's able to do follow-up attacks. He's able to easily reapply his shields quite frequently. So it just makes Gepard feel a little lackluster in comparison, but that doesn't take away that he is still a really great character overall. Now we have Natasha, which I would personally just place her in the decent characters category. I typically prefer the other sustains, even the 4-star sustains, over Natasha. For example, Lynx and especially Gallagher at this point. But it ultimately depends on what characters you have on your account, because Lynx is really good if you have like Clara and Blade especially. And Gallagher is really good right now if you are investing into the break meta. So when it comes to Natasha, it's really hard for me to actually recommend her over the other sustains if you do have them. And it's kind of similar reasoning to Gepard. It just feels like in general, when it comes to having those additional perks, it is a bit lackluster there, but it is completely understandable since Natasha and Gepard are 1.0 sustains and all the other sustains have come afterwards. So I do think she's a decent character still because she is able to sustain to a good degree. Personally, either be in the decent characters, honestly recommend Gallagher or Lynx over her, just because of the additional things they can provide when it comes to team synergies. Now we have Pela, which Pela is definitely going to be in the very strong, or oops, oh my gosh, she just jumped a tier ahead, I guess. She's definitely going to be in the very strong or useful characters category due to the fact that she is able to be placed on majority, if not practically every team, because of the fact that she can do massive defense reduction onto all enemies that you are facing, which means when it comes to our AoE characters, they're able to deal a lot more damage. When it comes to even our single target characters, they can still take advantage of her skill kit. And when it comes to our 4-star roster, she's also one of the 4 stars I do consider very, very good alongside Tingyun. I wouldn't say one is per se better than the other. It kind of just depends on what team you're playing. But in general, Pela is just a really great option. If you also have her at E4, then she is able to reduce ice resistance of enemies, which means now your ice DPSs are able to benefit even more with Pela on their side. Now we have Clara, which Clara is a weird case. She can honestly be in the underrated, or she could be maybe around the great characters tier. And I'm not really sure, honestly. I feel like she doesn't get talked about too much, in my personal opinion, from what I've seen. So I would probably put Clara in underrated because Clara is still able to dish out a good amount of damage as well as basically tank what is coming her way as long as you have, the proper team. So I feel like Clara is honestly a really good character for sure when it comes to just her follow-up attacks being able to deal a bunch of damage, especially if you have multiple enemies on the field and they all attack her, then you're just going to get off a bunch of follow-up attacks. A really nicely invested Clara, she's definitely able to do a good amount of damage, and I'm kind of sad that she doesn't get talked about too much, but I do think she's a great standard option overall and can definitely be nice if you are lacking a physical DPS on your account. Now we have Sampo, which Sampo could either be in underrated or great characters. I will say people do mention Sampo when it comes to using him as like a Black Swan alternative if you don't have Black Swan, since his E4 is really useful for the damage over time teams in particular. But I'm not really too sure. I feel like all the damage over time 4 stars are honestly great characters that do have their own ways to shine on team comps. I personally think all 3 of them are really nice. But for right now, I'll just put him in the great characters category. And the reason he's going here is because in all honesty, Black Swan would be the tier above. And I can't personally put Sampo and Black Swan on the same category just because of what they both do fully. But I do agree with the fact that Sampo is a pretty nice alternative if you do not have Black Swan. You could just use him, especially if you do have those Eidolons on him. And when it comes to damage over time, he is really consistent with his wind shear, and his ultimate also helps out with targets damage over time taken being increased. That helps out with just the damage potential of the damage over time. I just think Dice just said damage over time like 5 times in a row, and now I feel like I'm getting a tongue twister. But overall, great character. I think if you are interested in the damage over time play style, he's definitely a great option to consider looking at. Now we have, I'm assuming this is the physical trailblazer. So when it comes to the physical trailblazer, I don't personally recommend them that much. I do feel like in damage comparisons, they are pretty lackluster in comparison to a lot of our other DPS characters. And I do feel like the other trailblazers are honestly more worth using. So that's also another reason I put this trailblazer in particular and not recommended, because I would recommend Fire Trailblazer and especially Harmony Trailblazer way more than using physical over them. Now we have Hook, which I would honestly put Hook in decent characters. I have seen some pretty nutty hooks before, but when it comes to Hook overall, I do feel like she's a decent character, but I don't think she's anything crazy, I guess. I feel like she can get the job done if you really need a fire DPS character, which, to be fair, we are lacking those right now. We don't really have that many options that you could pick from, especially if you don't have Himiko or Topaz. Granted, Firefly is coming up, so that more than likely will be your primary fire DPS character. That's something to also keep in mind, but I can't rank Firefly just yet since she isn't out and I haven't gotten to play with her yet. So for Hook, I would just honestly put Hook in the decent characters. and I would probably call it a day just because I do feel like Hook does lack a bit in comparison to the characters that would be above. Now we have Luocha, which personally, Luocha could be either incredible value because of the fact that Luocha can definitely keep your team alive and can also dispel debuffs from enemies, as well as has an emergency heal and cleansing with the skill. Or we could put Luocha in the very useful / strong characters, which for right now, I'll just put Luocha right here. Once again, if you see characters move around, it's because I'm readjusting them. But I still think Luocha is a great sustain. And I do understand why some may think the other sustains are better than Luocha, which makes sense since the other sustains, for example, Huohuo, Adventuring, and Fushun, as I mentioned before, they also have additional perks other than just sustaining, which it feels like with Luocha in particular, if your job is just to sustain, he's perfect for it. Like, I still personally use him. I think he's a great option. If you are fighting those Mara struck enemies especially, that's where Luocha comes in clutch since he can dispel that, which technically Pela can dispel it too, but if we're looking at just sustains in general, that's something Luocha has, which is pretty nice. But when I think of the utility that Luocha has, I would say Luocha is a really great sustain, and it's definitely a great option still, especially if you have numerous sustains on your account. Luocha will definitely get the job done with keeping your team alive. Now we have Tingyun, which it's tough for me to place Tingyun as well, because I personally feel like Tingyun could either be maybe in the great characters category, and the reason I'd place him there in particular is because he does have notable flaws. He's still able to dish out a great amount of damage, and I have been seeing Harmony Trailblazer plus Tingyun, which is a really interesting combination for sure, and the damage output was actually pretty nice. But when it comes to Tingyun, I do feel like if you don't have a character on the team that's able to prevent him from getting CC'd, you're definitely going to face some struggles at times, because if he gets CC'd, then Lightning Lord goes all the way down, which definitely diminishes his damage potential. But I have also seen some Tingyuns that literally don't have any sustain on the team, and he just gets buffed to infinity and beyond, and he just literally destroys everything in his path. So Tingyun is an interesting one because he definitely has good potential, and I do feel like he also has flaws though that can technically hold him back at times. So it's really hard for me to honestly know where to rank him, because it really comes down to what team you're honestly using on him. But I still think he's a great character overall and has pretty nice potential, because even when Sparkle came out, for example, I've definitely was testing around Tingyun and Sparkle, for instance, and that combination is pretty good. Of course, you have Tingyun and Tingyun. You also have Fushun, who definitely helps out with the CC, since she is able to prevent CC with her skill kit, which definitely helps him out if you are looking at sustain options, for example. So he has a lot of characters he can honestly work around with. It just ultimately comes down, again, what team you may have when it comes to using him. Now we have Yang Qing, which honestly, I'd probably put him in the decent characters category. I do think when it comes to just damage potential and consistency, I do think he is lacking a bit in comparison to some of the other DPS characters. And I know a lot of people may compare him also to Jing Liu, which I do think Jing Liu's damage output is a bit more consistent when it comes to just damage overall. And they both are able to increase their crit stats to a degree, which definitely allows for some similarities to be made on, I guess, their characters in general. I do think he has great potential depending on what team you use him on, but I feel like it does take a lot of effort to get to said potential with him as a character in general. Because even when I look at other showcases of him, or I've seen previous, I guess, damage calculations, I do feel like, once again, just a little bit lackluster in comparison to other characters, but still overall not a bad character. I think you could definitely make him still shine, especially in some of the MOCs that are more catered to our hunt characters, because hunt in general, I guess, is in a weird spot most of the time. So hunt characters in general, I feel like do need something to make up for the fact that they are primarily single target. It is a little tougher, I feel like, for him to compete in comparison to some of our other hunt characters. For example, Zila has Resurgence, so this can help out with her attacking more frequently. And then you have characters like Boothill, for example, who is a completely different approach and primarily focuses heavily on break and just deals so much damage once enemies are weakness broken. So a lot of the characters have something that make them, I guess, shine, even though they are primarily single target. And I don't personally feel like Yangqing quite has that, unfortunately. Now we have Bailu, which I personally feel like Bailu and Japard can be rated together. Bailu, in my opinion, isn't a bad healer by any means. She definitely can heal you to a good degree for sure. The only thing though about Bailu in particular is the same thing I've been saying for the other sustains, is that some of our other sustains have a bit more that they provide in their skill kits when it comes to just buffing the team overall or just providing additional utility on top of the sustainability. So I would place Bailu alongside Japard here. For Xing honestly, I personally love Xing. I think she's just such a great 4-star option, but I'm going to put her in the great characters category only because of the fact that her with her tiles is really hit or miss. If you end up missing all the tiles somehow, then your damage output definitely diminishes by quite a bit. Now, of course, it just comes down to if you're lucky or not a lot of the time. And her ultimate being able to guarantee the tiles is also really good. So there is a factor that you will be able to guarantee it. But I've definitely seen some people get really unlucky with using her skill, even with Sparkle, and then they just don't get the matching tiles. So it's honestly it's like gambling within the gacha game, honestly, which I love her playstyle. I personally think it's very fun. And her damage output is definitely there, which I think she's honestly a really, really good free-to-play option if you are lacking DPS options. But of course, it ultimately comes down to who you are playing her with and if you have enough skill points just in case, I guess, things do go wrong. But overall, I think the great characters category can honestly fit for the most part. I do think she's, well, quite literally a great character, and she does have minimal flaws, but it's nothing too crazy that she would be in the decent category, in my opinion. Now we have Sushong, which I personally can see Sushong. I do feel like she's also a bit underrated, and it kind of just depends, of course, on who you use with her. But Sushong in particular, her ability to use her skill and then her ultimate and then her skill again is honestly really strong, since it makes me think of like a mini Zila in a way, with being able to attack more often within a cycle. So I personally think Sushong definitely has potential. I personally really like using her with Ruan Mei. Harmony Trailblazer works as well. And I feel like Sushong definitely was able to improve with the release of Ruan Mei because of the fact that Sushong will be able to weakness break faster now, which her skill kit does take advantage of enemies that are weakness broken. So I do kind of see her a little bit as an underrated character, since she's still a really great physical option in all honesty. Now we have Fire Trailblazer, which I would put Fire Trailblazer probably in the great characters. Fire Trailblazer is really nice for your Acheron teams if you want to take advantage of the taunting. Since Fire Trailblazer is able to taunt, that will count as a debuff, and this will work in Acheron's favor since she'll be able to get a stack from this. You can also run the Trend Market Lycone, as I've mentioned before, on your preservation characters. So Fire MC is a great budget option if you are using an Acheron team, which I could see Fire MC honestly being in the great characters category just because they aren't a bad character, but at the same time, they can also lack in comparison to the sustains above when it comes to sustainability as well as potential additional perks. But I will say the taunt is definitely a nice perk when it comes to Acheron specific teams. Now we have Yukong, which honestly, I would probably put her in the decent category. Yukong is an interesting case in particular because of the fact that if you don't have proper speed tuning, it's really hard to honestly make the team shine. And she does require a bit more, as I've mentioned, the speed tuning. Your builds have to be properly adjusted in that way. And sometimes getting your whole team to be speed tuned a very specific way can be really tedious, since if your relics are off and some of your characters are too fast or too slow, now it messes up the rotation when you use Yukong, since the buffs last for a very short amount of time. As long as you're able to make sure that your DPS character is able to always get those buffs, then Yukong can honestly be bumped up, but this ultimately comes down to your team in general and just the speed tuning. So I would honestly put her as a decent character since she does require a bit more in comparison to some of the other buffer characters. Now we have March 7th. I would honestly place her with Natasha. I do feel like March 7th isn't a bad sustain, but the fact that she's not able to provide those team-wide shields definitely, in my opinion, puts her a bit lower than Japard, and would definitely put her a bit lower than Aventurine once we get to him. So I feel like she's an alright sustain, especially starting off. But as you progress through the game, you might want to look more at characters like Japard, Bailu, Luocha, Huahua, Aventurine, and so on. But her freeze in general is pretty nice though. I do like that she's able to freeze enemies, since if you have like a good amount of ice characters on the team, you can maybe make a pretty cool freeze team, but it just comes down to who she's being played with as well. Now for Dan Heng, honestly, really hard for me to say, because I feel like when you place him with, for example, Ruan Mei and Welt, he's really good with them, because Ruan Mei and Welt is a pretty nice synergy for being able to delay enemies by quite a lot. So in Dong Heng's case, he can take advantage of being alongside them. But in general, I do feel like he's a pretty decent character overall. I would probably place him in this tier right here. He does, I feel like, lack in comparison to some of the other DPS characters, but for your starter character, especially if you do have particular synergies, for example, Ruan Mei and Welt, for instance, I do feel like he can shine quite a bit with them, just because of how that team operates. He'll be able to take advantage of the enemies being slowed. And then, of course, Ruan Mei is able to provide really nice buffs for Welt as well as Dan Heng. So he has some potential, but for right now, I would probably just place him in the decent categories tier. Now we have Himeko, which Himeko, in my opinion, can be seen a bit as underrated, because I do know that she's really great in pure fiction, but she can definitely be used outside of pure fiction too. Himeko alongside Topaz is a really good fire core, especially if you're using them against enemies that are fire weak. They're definitely able to get the job done really nicely, because they're both able to unleash frequent follow-up attacks, especially since Himeko will be able to take advantage of enemies that are weakness broken. And if all the enemies are weak to fire, then this will be really easy to do with those two. And you can use them alongside Ruan Mei or Asta, for instance. So I do feel like Himeko can be a bit underrated, since she can definitely be used in MOC as well as pure fiction. I think she's great for both modes, depending on what you're fighting. Now we have Welt, which I also think Welt's pretty underrated. Welt is able to do turn manipulation in a turn-based game where essentially you're able to slow down and delay enemies heavily. So I feel like that's very powerful, especially in a turn-based game. And when it comes to just him in general, if your team is strong enough, you can honestly get away with him being the sustain of the team. And of course, if you pair him with Ruan Mei, then enemies will get delayed by quite a lot, which makes that synergy incredibly strong. Welt can also be used as a sub DPS on your team, since he can deal his own fair share damage for sure. So I do think he is a bit underrated when it comes to how he's been perceived, I guess, on tier lists in general. So I would say he's an underrated character. Now we have Kafka. I would definitely say I would honestly say she's in the very strong / useful characters if you are looking at damage over time teams in general. And I guess if your focus is damage over time, then she would honestly get bumped up to the incredible value. But just in general, as her as a character, I think she's a very, very strong character. And when it comes to just damage over time, she's definitely the queen of it. Being able to detonate damage over time is incredibly powerful and allows for her to deal a nice amount of damage. If you pair her up with Black Swan or any of the other damage over time characters, then the team comp will be very, very strong as a result. So I definitely think Kafka is definitely worthy of the very strong or even incredible value when it comes to just characters in general. Now we have Silverwolf, which same thing. She would definitely be in the very strong / useful characters, since if Payla's in this tier, I personally feel like I do have to put Silverwolf in this tier as well. Silverwolf is able to implant weaknesses onto enemy from your allies. Makes her very useful if you are missing a weakness onto the enemy. She could honestly go up to incredible value because of that factor, since overall I do feel like Silverwolf has really good pull value, but her debuffs in general make her really good for Acheron teams. And overall, she's just a very great character when it comes to all the debuffs she's able to inflict, the weakness implantation, and overall really great debuffer that is definitely worthwhile for sure. Arlen, I unfortunately would have to put him in not recommended, because I do feel like he is a bit lackluster in comparison to the other DPS characters in the game, unfortunately. I really wish there was a way to like really amplify his damage by quite a lot. And I know some people that do play him, they have a lot of fun with him, but personally, I feel like I wouldn't personally recommend him when it comes to our 4-star roster, or just like if you were to build the main DPS, I just wouldn't recommend him as much as other characters. So that's why I have him here. Now we have Blade, which honestly, I'm not really sure where to place Blade. But for his comfortability, he's like really, really good at that. But when it comes to him as a character, when it comes to, I guess, damage output, I do feel like in comparison to some of our higher tiers in damage output, he is a bit lacking, but he's overall a pretty great character when it comes to just what he's able to provide team comps and just his damage capabilities. He is a bit different than a lot of our other DPS characters since, of course, he does want to lose HP and he takes advantage of being hit often. So this is where Lynx can definitely come in. And overall, I feel like Blade is a great DPS, but I don't think he's a top tier DPS either. And I really wonder if there's a way, I guess, to buff Blade further, or if it's really difficult due to the fact that he relies so heavily on the HP factor or not. I'm not really sure, honestly, but I think Blade, definitely great character for sure. Now, Luca, honestly, I feel like Luca would be either underrated or great characters. That's how I feel about Luca and Sampo, honestly, because I feel like they're both really great characters for damage over time centric teams, and Luca in particular can deal quite a bit of damage when it comes to just break potential. So I feel like personally Luca's a great 4-star, especially when it comes to physical break. So I want to honestly say, yeah, I think he could just be a great character overall. Now we have Don Hongael, which I would absolutely place him in the very strong slash useful characters. He is absolutely a powerhouse with how much damage he's able to unleash onto enemies. So I would definitely place him in this category. He also, of course, has Sparkle now, which Sparkle helps with the skill point consumption. But even if you didn't have Sparkle before, you could have absolutely used Hanya. She still helps out with that. But now that Don Hongael also has Sparkle to mess around with, he's way more comfortable to use now. And you don't really have to worry as much about the skill point consumption in comparison to before. So overall, I think he's a great DPS character, definitely worth investing into, and an absolute powerhouse with how much damage he can deal. Now we have Fu Xuan. She will be the first character going into incredible value for your account. She's able to provide additional crit rate for the team. She's able to provide damage mitigation. She keeps the team alive very, very well, and that is why I would rate her up here. I do think she's an incredible asset to have. I think Fu Xuan is worthy of this tier. When it comes to our sustains, she's definitely one of the best. Now we have Lynx. Lynx, honestly, I would say Lynx can go in the great characters. Lynx has her own usage for sure. She's able to allow destruction class characters to get hit more often, which means that she'll be able to pair really nicely with characters like Blade. She can also pair really nicely with characters like Clara. I do think her sustaining capabilities are pretty decent for the most part. So I do think Lynx can be in the great characters category overall. Now we have Guinaifen, which I do think Guinaifen's underrated because I do think she can help team comps outside of damage over time as well. Because of her Fire Kiss ability, you are able to use her on Acheron teams if you need a budget option. You're also able to just use her as a general debuffer. She can honestly work on Dr. Ratio teams because especially if you have Eidolon, she's able to inflict a good amount of debuffs, which Dr. Ratio will be able to heavily take advantage of to ensure that he's able to hit his follow-up attacks. So I do think Guinaifen also has usage outside of damage over time, which makes her pretty good overall. And of course, on damage over time itself, she's still pretty nice to use. So I personally think Guinaifen is a bit of an underrated character in general. And now we have Herta. I can honestly say the same about Herta because I do feel like when it comes to pure fiction, she's an absolute beast at just being able to synergize really well, especially if you have Himiko. That combination is just really good. So I would probably place Herta in this category as well. Now we have Jingliu. I would place her in the very strong slash useful category because she is also an absolute powerhouse for sure. She deals a bunch of damage. She's also pretty easy to build in my personal opinion since she's able to give herself so much crit rate. So when it comes to damage potential, Jingliu is definitely up there, and she's overall just a really nice DPS character to have on your account. Shui Yi, honestly, I would either put her in I would honestly say for Shui Yi, underrated. I do think she's definitely going up now because of Ruan Mei, Harmony Trailblazer. She's able to work really nicely with them. I also showcased Shui Yi alongside Tingyun and Robin, and that was able to work really nicely. So Shui Yi definitely has options with what she can be paired up with. And I do think it's really interesting that she is a more hybrid character with being able to take advantage of the crit stats as well as break effect. I do think Shui is a really nice 4-star though overall, and has pretty nice potential when it comes to what she's able to provide as a DPS character on your team. So definitely great character. I would highly recommend Shui, honestly. If you are lacking a quantum DPS as well, Shui can definitely be worth considering for sure. Now we have Topaz. With Topaz, I think she's a pretty useful character. Now Topaz is in a little weird situation, I feel like, because at times some may want to use someone other than Topaz on certain team comps, but Topaz is a pretty good character to use alongside follow-up attackers. For example, Dr. Ratio. You can also use her alongside Himiko. Himiko and Topaz is a great combination. So I feel like Topaz is a very useful character because of her proof of debt ability, which highly benefits the damage of those follow-up attackers. And it's even better, of course, if the element weaknesses are matched up. The main primary thing that can suck at times, which isn't necessarily a flaw to her, but just whatever you're fighting, if the enemies aren't, let's say you're using Dr. Ratio and Topaz and the enemies aren't fire weak as well as imaginary weak, this can kind of suck for damage output, and you may actually want to consider using a different character, potentially other than Topaz. It's not necessarily Topaz's fault, it's giving you enemies with different elements, so there's not much you could do about that, but still the Topaz and Ratio team is still able to perform very well even in that scenario. So I would still highly recommend Topaz as a character, especially if you are heavily interested in the follow-up centric playstyle or just follow-up teams in general. Now Argenti, definitely underrated. Argenti is honestly a pretty good physical DPS in my opinion. He's able to unleash a good amount of AoE damage for sure. He's really good in pure fiction, but you can also technically use him, of course, still in Memory of Chaos. I do think people just kind of overlook Argenti, unfortunately, which I'm not really too sure why. I do think he's a great character. He's able to give himself additional crit rate, and he's just able to unleash a bunch of damage overall when it comes to the AoE aspect of things. A great physical character as well. And if you pair him with Tingyun, then the ultimate won't be as difficult to get, of course. So him and Tingyun are like bread and butter in my personal opinion. They pair really nicely together. So it just comes down, I guess, to who you're using him with. But I do think he is a bit underrated because I do feel like he has a lot of damaging potential for sure. Now we have Hanya, which I would say Hanya is honestly a great character because if you don't have Sparkle, she is your alternative to try to get more skill points from one of your supportive characters because of her Burden ability. Burden is also really good though for allowing your team members to just deal more damage overall. So I do feel like Hanya in general definitely has her uses. She's definitely able to give a good amount of speed and attack, of course, with her ultimate as well. And she's not honestly a bad supportive character. It just kind of sucks because they've been releasing so many supportive characters that technically, I guess, do more than what she does. So she does get overlooked a lot of the time, but overall, I think she's still pretty good when it comes to her being able to provide those additional skill points if you do not, of course, have Sparkle as well. Now we have Huohuo, which I would also put her in incredible value. She's really good on a bunch of teams. She's especially nice on damage over time teams since they can highly take advantage of those additional buffs that she can give. Her ultimate, which is the attack and energy. Huohuo is able to provide a bunch of cleansing for your team when it comes to just providing you, of course, sustain, but as well as those additional perks for your characters to take advantage of. So I would honestly put her in incredible value. I do think that she can definitely be up here as well. Now we have Ruan Mei, which I would also place her in the incredible value category. Ruan Mei just provides so many buffs, and they are definitely able to be used on a bunch of teams. A bunch of teams can take advantage of the buffs that Ruan Mei gives. Her weakness breaking efficiency is really great for break-centric characters, and honestly any characters to be fair. But break-centric characters, now that we are entering, I would say, the break meta, I do feel like Ruan Mei is definitely shining even more now in comparison to before. Also able to delay enemies. She can also give ult type penetration for your allies to, of course, deal more damage. And she just also gives really nice damage buffs in general. So Ruan Mei provides a bunch for your allies, the additional speed as well. There's just so many buffs in one character, which I think is honestly crazy how many buffs they gave her, but I'm definitely not complaining. I feel like she is an incredible character, and whenever she does get a rerun, I would highly recommend considering her if you haven't already picked her up, especially because of just how universal she is when it comes to the buffs that she does give, being able to benefit majority of characters, if not practically all characters in the game. Now we have Dr. Ratio, which I would place him in the very strong / useful character category. He can be used as a hyper carry, but he also can be used, of course, alongside the follow-up team. And I do like that he's able to do both. I feel like he is a very strong character, especially with his follow-up attacks for sure, as long as you ensure that he is able to unleash his follow-up attacks onto enemies. And I did mention before in the video that for our hunt characters, there has to be a way for them to be able, I guess, to compete with our other classes since they are single target. I do feel like Dr. Ratio having his consistent follow-up attacks depending on your team comp, as long as they are consistent, he'll definitely be able to deal with enemies in a timely fashion. Plus, his ultimate also helps out with that, since what you could do is focus one enemy down with his skill and his follow-up, and then focus the other enemy down with his ultimate, and then Dr. Ratio essentially will be attacking 2 enemies within that cycle, which can definitely make him really powerful for what he's able to deal damage-wise. Now we have Black Swan. I would also put her in the very strong / useful characters. He's able to provide really nice defense drops, which definitely helps out with damage potential of your characters on the team, but she's also able to stack Arcana, which is her own form of damage over time. And overall, I think Black Swan is a really good addition for damage over time teams, but you can technically use her outside of that as well. I kind of consider her a wind Pela because she's able to provide those defense drops. So I think Black Swan in general is just very, very good for the utility that she provides, and definitely really strong as well with her own damage output if you pair her alongside, of course, your damage over time characters. Her damage output can definitely be up there for sure alongside whoever else you are playing her with. Now we have Misha, who I think is personally underrated. I do think Misha's able to dish out a good amount of damage, especially considering the fact that he has his multi-hits with his ultimate, and this can be up to 10 hits, which is just really good in general for being able to wither down an enemy's toughness meter. It can work in an AoE scenario, but it can also work on single target, because in a single target scenario, he's able to basically just destroy the toughness meter of whatever enemy you are facing. So I feel like Misha definitely has his uses, and he can honestly deal a good amount of damage. I've definitely seen some really cool Misha showcases, and I would say he is definitely on the underrated side, since he could definitely be a pretty nice character overall. Now we have Sparkle, which I would definitely put Sparkle as well in the incredible value, because she's able to provide a bunch of skill points, which the additional skill points can actually help your other supportive character be able to use their skill more often. Let's use Tingyun in this scenario. Because of the additional skill points that Sparkle provides, Tingyun can actually skill spam more often, which means she's going to get her ultimate faster, which means now your DPS character is going to get their ultimate faster. Sparkle is able to give that additional perk in a sense of having more skill points to mess around with. She also gives massive crit damage bonuses and makes it way easier for your DPS character to have attack boots. So I think she honestly provides incredible value for your account because of these factors. Plus, she's also able to give additional buffs on top of that. So overall, I feel like Sparkle is definitely an awesome character with what she's able to provide your team members. Now we have Acheron, which I would honestly put Acheron in the incredible value for your account, because you can pair her up with 2 Nihility. I've also seen people pair her up with 1 Nihility, 1 Harmony, depending on who the Harmony is. I've definitely seen Sparkle, for instance. Acheron is basically just able to storm through all content in the game, in my opinion, with ease, because of the fact that with her ultimate, she ignores whatever weakness the enemy is, which means she could just deal with whatever weaknesses they have without any issues. And she's able to dish out absurd amount of damage. I do think when it comes to our DPS characters, she's definitely on top with what she's able to do damage-wise. So I would say out of all the DPS characters, I would say she's the only one I would probably put in the incredible value just because of what she provides. Not to say these other DPS characters aren't worth it. I think they're also really good. If I were to only put one DPS character up here, I would probably say it would have to be Acheron, just because of the fact that she has an incredible pull value with how much damage she's able to do. And usually I don't put DPS characters in a tier like this, because eventually there are going to be new DPS characters that probably are able to do more. I'm not too sure in Acheron's case when that would happen, just because of how much damage she deals. And I feel like she, in a sense, is an anomaly, or I guess she's like an outlier when it comes to our damage dealers. So I feel like she can definitely be up here in this tier. And if you guys disagree, you can let me know for sure. But I do think she's worthy of being in the incredible value tier. Now we have Aventurine, which I would also place him up here, which I think is funny. A lot of the characters at the end here are going to be the ones that are placed up here. But Aventurine is just so good with his sustaining ability. He's able to provide a nice amount of effect resistance, which allows your allies to resist debuffs that may come their way. He's also really good on the follow-up team, and his follow-ups in general can provide a nice source of additional damage output. He can also debuff enemies with his ultimate because he has that an unnerved effect alongside the ultimate depending on who he targets, which means that you can actually use him alongside Acheron as well. You can even put the Trend Market Light Cone on him so that he's able to have that chance of burning enemies, which means Acheron is now able to take advantage of those debuffs. So you can pair him with her, you can pair him with the follow-up team, and honestly, you could pair him with majority of teams, depending on if they want more so a healer or a shielder. But his shields are also very, very consistent. Whenever he does his follow-up attack, when he has enough blind bet points, he is able to replenish that shield as well. So when it comes to sustain potential, he is absolutely up there and by far one of the best sustains in the game with what he's able to provide, which is why I would put him as having incredible value for your account. Now we have Gallagher, which honestly, Gallagher, I would say, you know what, now that I'm looking at this, I'm definitely gonna have to move some characters around, but I think that Gallagher can either be in the great characters or potentially even the very useful / strong characters. When it comes to break effect teams, Gallagher is definitely the one you want to go for because he's able to deal his own amount of damage with super break. If you have, of course, Harmony MC on that team, since Gallagher is the primary sustained character that wants to have break effect due to him having more outgoing healing with that break effect. So I feel like Gallagher is definitely going to be on the rise. You're going to see him being suggested more in team comps, especially now that we're getting more break-centric characters. So I feel like Gallagher can honestly be up in the very useful category. I do think that for a 4-star sustain, he's just really, really good with what he's able to provide. And he can either be up here or he could be in great characters, but I think he's honestly really good with what he provides team comps in general. If we are, of course, considering Eidolons alongside it, since his E2 is definitely really important. But I think Gallagher overall, a very, very nice sustain. And I would recommend if you don't have too many sustains of the, for example, incredible value tier, I would say definitely building into Gallagher can be worthwhile for sure. Now we have Boothill, which he's definitely going into the very strong / useful characters. Boothill is a powerhouse when it comes to just dealing so much damage to enemies, especially once their weakness broken. You can honestly use him and Gallagher together if enemies are fire weak. Gallagher can help out with reducing their toughness meters, which Boothill can highly appreciate since Boothill's damage is just really good once those enemies are weakness broken. He pairs very nicely with Ruan Mei. He pairs very, very nicely with Bronya. You can also use Harmony MC, of course, for those additional super breaks. So I think honestly, he's a very nice DPS character. If you are lacking a strong physical DPS, he's definitely worthwhile to consider. Now we have Harmony MC, which I would put them in the very useful character category. Harmony MC in general has a lot of potential when it comes to just break effect characters in general because of that super break ability. The additional damage you're able to deal with super break is really, really powerful, and I can see Harmony MC becoming better in the future as we keep getting more and more break-centric characters. But I would honestly put them in the very strong / useful characters category. For right now, they may honestly go up in the future, who knows? But I think they're really good right now. Lastly, we have Robin, which I will also put her in the incredible value because Robin is able to provide very consistent damage buffs, and then when she uses her ultimate, she provides massive attack buffs. She also advances the team forward by 100%, which is really useful for being able to act again within a cycle. And what's really nice is that Robin's also able to deal her own amount of damage when her ultimate is active, and this can actually help you get back skill points. And what I mean by this is if an enemy is really low on health, if you were to basic attack and Robin's damage as well as the basic attack's damage is enough to kill the enemy, then you're actually able to regenerate skill points that way, since the tick damage is going to be enough to get rid of that enemy on the field. So that's also another perk, and that's a very situational perk, of course, but that's still something you can honestly do with Robin, which I think is pretty cool. And Robin overall, I do think she's a really, really nice buffing character. She's incredible on the follow-up team, and she can also be used on other teams as well. I've showcased her with Jing Liu, I showcased her with Blade, and there's definitely a lot of synergies that you could do. If you pair Robin alongside Bronya, that's a really cool synergy, since Bronya will be able to advance forward your DPS, and then at the end of the cycle, when you advance forward everyone again with Robin, you're able to attack very frequently in that one cycle because of the fact that you have Bronya advancing you as well as Robin. With your sustain on that kind of team though, you definitely want to go with someone who's more skill point efficient, or rather skill point positive. Luocha is a great choice for this. So overall, when it comes to Robin, I think she has incredible potential, especially as a buffing character for sure. And I do think she is worthy of the incredible value tier as well. I'm trying to see now though if I'd move some characters around, because I do feel like it's really tough to say. Looking at this list in general, I do think that part of me kind of wants to bump up Tingyun, only because I'm looking at what characters are in the same tier as him. Now granted, the sustains should not be, of course, compared to the DPS, because these sustains aren't, of course, dealing damage like Tingyun would, and it's more so just saying that they are a great character. But honestly, I can maybe bump him up, because I feel like his damage potential is pretty good. I can see myself bumping him up. And honestly, it's really tough. I'm not sure, honestly. I want to bump up potentially him and Blade because of what they're able to provide, but I'm also not sure. I feel like it could be either or. They could be up here or they could be below. I think either one can honestly work, because I feel like this looks fine, honestly. Hey, what do you guys think? Do you guys think they should be here, or do you guys think they should be up? I think they could be honestly either or. I'm not sure. At this point, we're just gonna move Tingyun and do eeny meeny miny mo as to where he's going to be. But I think overall this is a okay list for the most part. If you guys disagree with something, I'd love to know what, and where would you potentially move characters based on these descriptions of what they may or may not provide. But yeah, I think this is fine. I did have fun recording this. This was definitely a longer one for sure. I'm definitely going to be cutting down some of this, but yeah, I hope you guys did enjoy. Let me know where you guys will place characters and what characters you guys have been enjoying the most. If you did enjoy this video, do make sure to subscribe, leave a like, support the video, and I hope to see you next time. Peace.